Hi, my name is Tracey, and this is Local Matters. My hope is to bring you stories of the good things that are happening in Thunder Bay. And for this very first show, I am very, very fortunate to have Erin Beagle with me as my first guest. I'm really excited about this. So Erin, you have done a lot of media, a lot of social media in Thunder Bay. A lot of people recognize you already. Sure. And I know this is not the part that you came here to talk about, but I just want you to introduce yourself.
Sure.
And just a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm Erin. I'm not from Thunder Bay. I came from British Columbia and have been a part of Roots to Harvest, which we now call Roots Community Food Center, since there has been one, which is around 2007, 2008. Stuff around food is not my background. My background is people. My background is, I did a lot of work with outdoors and experiential education. But Roots is about people, and so it's a really good fit that way, and I've had a lot of autonomy and leeway to make Roots what I think it could be. I have a young family, and I love living in Thunder Bay. It's such a good spot for me to be in, and I enjoy all the things we do at Roots, but I also do other things like go running and do my own gardening at home and a little bit of crafting and things like that. So I don't know, that's a little bit about me.
I really appreciate that because that's more than I was expecting.
Good, okay, good.
Yeah, so I know you're also you're a very active person.
Sure.
Lots of activities that you do, which I don't really ever understand how you have time for them,
Sure.
But I know you do. So you talked about Roots, that's what we're really here to talk about. And Roots has a kind of cool origin story. It started very, very small. Mm-hmm. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so Roots started as a short-term project at Lakehead University through the social work department. And I was working for another program at the time called Action for Neighborhood Change, which is now Evergreen, a United Neighborhood. And there were people part of that project who had written the grant to the Ministry of Research and Innovation for this project called Roots to Harvest. And it was pretty ambiguous, but it was about the science and technology around food insecurity with youth. And so I was hired part-time to just run this three-year program. And so that's a very short way of saying that's the beginning. And the Roots you see now is very different from that. Probably our first signature program that people remember is the Garden on Cornwall and Algoma. And that was our first employment program for youth ages 15 to 18. We continue doing that program. And then our other origin was in all the high schools. And because that was sort of my connection also to Thunder Bay. So working in the high schools around food and engaging young folks around that. And then since it's just grown and grown and grown to be more people, more age ranges, more program offerings. Every time we switched locations, so we started at Lakehead University in this little corner. I don't think I can even find that office anymore. It's pretty obscure. And then we got some space at Superior High School, and then we moved into the Both Hands Bread upstairs. We were there as Derek was building that space, and then finally where we are now, which is the old Monty Parks building, the old community living building. On 450 Fort William Road. So now it ranges from employment and education, which is kind of our origin, to advocacy and access, and includes ages 15 to 100 plus, basically.
So this is a really hard question. People that I've been involved with Roots for a long time, and they say, well, what does Roots do?
Right.
And that's not an easy question to answer.
Yeah.
At one time it would have been.
Yeah.
But can you just touch on a couple of the programs?
Yeah.
Just briefly, the ones that are front of mind.
So if I only ever have 5 seconds, the sentence is Roots uses food as a tool to work with people. And so there's many different ways we do that. So I mentioned employment. We have 2 large urban farms where we employ 16 to 18-year-olds and then 18 to 30-year-olds at the other one. So those are supportive employment programs where folks just might need a little extra leeway and support to fit employment into their lives in a healthy way that helps them move forward into their what's next. And there's lots of things in the way for that for folks. And we know in Thunder Bay that people who live in chronic poverty, who are racialized, are disproportionately affected by lack of income, food insecurity, barriers to employment. So those are mainly the folks that we employ through those programs on urban farms. And then we're in the high schools doing education. And I would say like we're not the place that's telling you like how much sugar is in your Monster drink or to eat your rainbow of vegetables on your plate every day. It's really about the curiosity, the interest, the connection to food, and drawing on people's experiences they already know and have of food. So an example I always use is, folks from Northern Ontario, kids especially, they know, in January, what fish you can fish in what lakes and what lures to use and what bait. Like that's good food knowledge. That's good food literacy. And so we want to draw on those, not like tell and teach and input, but like, what do you know? How does this look? Where does that come from? And we try to not put value statements around like that food is like local or organic or good or bad. Like food is food, and we want to be curious around food. And then advocacy is more around why people are food insecure. So it's not that people don't have enough food, it's that people don't have the income to meet their day-to-day needs, food being one of those. So we do work around tax clinics, getting people to be able to access the tax system and the benefits that come from that, which is like thousands and thousands of dollars for folks and families who don't do their taxes and who are sort of, again, disengaged from that. And then ID clinics is the other one, people getting their ID so they can access, again, the services that they deserve. And then the last one is access. And that's like, there's a million things. Those are community food markets, which you know all about, is selling food at a smaller price, at a lower price than what we buy it for, fruits and vegetables. Everybody's welcome.
Yep.
And our community meals for seniors and elders is another big part of that. So 2 meals a week for folks 60 and plus that are free. And again, the 60 plus crowd, everybody's welcome to come and join us for a meal made from scratch food.
So I'm often there for those meals, and I find that the community part is maybe not more important, but equal in importance.
Absolutely.
Like we're, I say we're because I am employed at Roots to Harvest as well, our Roots Community Food Center.
Yeah.
So that little change up I just did, there's been a name change, which we will talk about in a few minutes. But what I was wanting to say is that it's not that the food is more or less important, but the community is as important. And that's something you want to foster as well.
Well, we want to say again, like people who, an example, like our meals is a really good example. So some people who come there need food, may not eat otherwise if they don't come for a meal there. Some people, it's cost savings. It's like a little less stress on their finances so that their dollar can go a little further. And some people, it's wellness, that's just like the quality of food is really good. But for most people who are there, including all those who I just mentioned who are there for a meal too, but their primary is company and community. And especially in that crowd where just staying active, staying social, keeping connection is really important to mental and physical health. And the World Health Organization identified loneliness as being an epidemic. And we see that these programs directly impact people who are at risk of more isolation and loneliness.
Right. Yeah. I like the feel of when people enter the building.
Me too.
You know they feel that they're in a safe place. So we're just going to take a break for a couple of minutes, and we'll be right back with Erin. Hi, and welcome back to Local Matters. I'm here talking with Erin Beagle. Erin, in the first segment we talked about the 2 names. Everyone in the community still recognizes, and if you use a Google search, it comes up Roots to Harvest. There was a name change recently.
Yeah.
How long has that been?
Since 2021.
Okay. What's the reason for the name change?
Yeah, so we started as Roots to Harvest. That was the name that we wrote the grant for, that we built the program and the organization around, that we incorporated as. But as we grew in our capacity to do more, we could just do gardens and high schools, like education and growing food and employment. And we've added so much more. We work with many more communities. We work with the newcomer and refugee community in our Culture Kitchen program. We work with older adults and adult learners who have returned to school to do our Cooking for Cred program. We've expanded our employment, like we've done so much more. And as we came into the Monty Park Center, that building we're in now, and we were developing like what is next for Roots? Like where are we going with this? Like what does our community need and want? there's an organization called Community Food Centers Canada, and we have like totally fangirled them since they began, and their motto is good food for all. Their approach is so similar to ours about people first, dignity around food access. And we always knew that if we were going to get bigger or do more, those were our values and principles as well. So we approached them because they've expanded into different communities to ask about what would it look like if there was a community food center in Thunder Bay, in Northern Ontario, a real gap in their map. So they're all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast, even north into Iqaluit. They are in Indigenous communities in Canada, but there was nothing in Northern Ontario. Winnipeg is the closest one to us.
Okay.
And I think that the challenge around food access and food security and the conversation around that is unique to our area, as it is actually in all the parts of Canada that they're in. And so we started that conversation about what would that look like, and obviously became fast friends. Like this, we share the same principles and values, and if they're looking to expand, we're ready. And we weren't ready before. We didn't have the core of people and programming and even just like the capacity to think bigger, but we were ready then. And so we started those conversations and we applied and they accepted us, and the name change became a part of that. And so if you're from Thunder Bay, Roots to Harvest might mean something to you.
Right.
But if you're not in Thunder Bay, Roots to Harvest is like what is that? What does that mean?
Sure.
And so the community food center part unites all community food centers. There's 15 across Canada, so they're all something community food center. Not always the name, but usually it's like something else. Anyway, and we felt that Roots was important to keep. The to harvest was like take it or leave it. Even when we talk about it still, it's Roots. Like we just talk about Roots.
Yeah, we say Roots.
Yeah. So so we became Roots Community Food Center like right mid-pandemic, when we were like doing a whole bunch of other things at that time, and have developed, with them from there. And I think it's important to say like we remain autonomous in our programs, in our hiring, in our budget, in our board of directors, and how we respond to our community. But the principles and values unite us across the country to talk about what is a welcoming space, what is dignified food access, how do we contribute to national policies that are impacting Canadians across the country. And so we get to share input from Northern Ontario perspective, and we get to receive the network from the rest of Canada to inform our work here locally.
So there's people that are watching that don't have probably or could possibly never heard food security, insecurity, access. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
To someone that's maybe doesn't know what you're talking about, essentially.
Yeah, sure. It'd be hard to not know about it, especially since the pandemic, and it's like, it is so relevant with food prices and costs and what people are experiencing right now. But typically we would say that somebody is food insecure when they can't meet their day-to-day needs around food, either like even just culturally or geographically, or just like their own dietary needs, if they have special dietary needs. So there's lots of reasons why somebody is food insecure, or like what contributes to that. But fundamentally, it's income. If we don't have the income we need to meet our own food requirements, whether that be the types of food we want, the quality of food we require for our own health and wellness, or being able to get there and back, like the isolation that some northern communities face around being able to access food. So so much of northern Canada is very food insecure just because of their access or the cost of those foods there. And so the work is to move the needle on getting people to be more food secure. And the response normally to food insecurity has been food banks. Then let's get food banks. And we have seen since the 80s, when food banks really popped up in a national way, that the need has just grown. Like the food banks is not solving the problem. And it's not that it's contributing to the problem, but it's not solving the problem. And so I think the community food centers is an answer to what actually gets at this. So we have to meet immediate needs. Like some people are hungry, they need food, and so meals do this. But how we meet them is important. So like a meal, again, is an example. At our community meals, there's not a lineup for food. You come in and you sit down at a table. It's restaurant service. It's very dignified. And that's not to say that places who have lineups, like functionally, that just works. Like not
How
everybody
it's
has the
done.
space
That's right.
to set up tables and that thing. So it's not slack on those things. It's just a different response in a different way.
Sure.
And even our community food markets, it's not free food. People pay for it still. There might be programs that support them in different ways to access that food, but there's still choice and quantity and quality, and we would put that above other things for that. And then there's the advocacy part. Like, we still need to have the conversations. Can't just say, here's your food, but not have the conversations at larger levels about how we get that solved for them. People don't want to go to food banks. They don't want to. And they don't want to stand in line and get handouts, and they don't want to not have choice. And they would rather be able to meet their own needs. So we want to get to those places. How do you meet your needs? How do you get to a place where you are stable in your own life and you can make choices that are yours to make and again, meet your day-to-day needs? So that's a long-winded way of saying that food insecurity is pervasive and systemic. It disproportionately affects, in Northern Ontario, it disproportionately affects Indigenous people, Indigenous communities. And we see that in our meals, in our markets, in our outreach programs, in our employment programs, and people who are affected by systemic barriers and systemic racism. So there's so much work to be done. And I think the latest report that Food Banks Canada just put out was we're looking at 20% of Canadians now who are living in or with poverty. And that's not deep poverty. That is there's a range of poverty that people are facing. But if you can't make your basic needs, then there's a different range of poverty that we face. So it's growing, and our solutions are the solutions are complicated, and they need to be bigger.
I think the really important takeaway, or one of them from all of what you just said, is that people don't necessarily want the handout. They want to be able to pay for their food, but you can't if you have to make a choice between paying for your place to live or putting healthy food on the table.
That's right.
And that's where the community markets come into play, and we are definitely going to talk more about that in just a couple of minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to Local Matters. Erin, you and I were talking about community markets, and I know we still get a lot of people. There's lots of Thunder Bay that doesn't know what our community markets or the Roots community markets are all about.
Yeah.
So if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So community food markets are part of our response to food access. We would say that for every one person who goes to a food bank, which is more and more Canadians, that there are 10 people who could probably use a food bank but will never go. And so again, finding these dignified ways that people can access food at a price that is more affordable to them and incorporate fresh fruits and vegetables in their daily lives is important. So they began as with funding in a project from Community Food Centres Canada. They had the Public Health Agency of Canada money, we call it PHAC, money to start those. And the idea initially was twofold. One, to provide people with dietary-related diseases access to more fruits and vegetables through something called a Greens incentive. And it was actually called a Greens prescription before, but we don't like to medicalize the idea of food, and so we call it this Greens incentive. So some people that access the markets still with our partners get a card, like a swiping card that's loaded up for them every month based on their family size to come and use and spend at the market. And they can also spend their own cash, and they can come whenever they like, and or they can reload the card themselves. And then others can come and still access that same price of the market. So the price is about 25% less than what we purchase it for, but they use their own money to do that. So depending on who our partners are, depends on kind of who gets these Greens incentive cards. So we started that here first in Thunder Bay, and working with DSAB and working with Norwest Community Health Centre as our health partner. They continue to all be involved in different ways. But the idea is so interesting because, again, it's people are still purchasing food, but at a choice that's theirs, at a price they can afford more, and they can plan for it. And like you said earlier, people want this food on their tables. So it expanded then to our partner in Kiashkazagin Anishinaabe First Nation, which is Gull Bay First Nation, and started going weekly up there. We already do some work with them, and that was, again, this was like 2020 during the pandemic, just like this early response. And then the model is really, it's just an easy one to replicate. So now it's in Gull Bay, it's in White Sand once a week, it's in Rocky Bay First Nation once a month. We just started going to Pays Plat. We just went there for the first time. It's in Thunder Bay 4 times a week. So at our site at 450 Fort William Road 3 times a week, and then the Vale Community Center once a week. And then there's these sort of pop-up markets with other places who are curious about how could this help the population we work with and serve. So at the college or the university, there's some good examples of that. And we're really interested in growing this model with more health partners, especially, that can help their clients access more fresh fruits and vegetables. So,
you mentioned that you want all people shopping there. So people might question that. So this is already being subsidized. Why would you want all people shopping there?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And so my main answer is because everybody's welcome, and why not? And also that helps make it a dignified experience for everybody. So if people shop there that might not need it, but who are popping by and come on in, like, we would love that, because that normalizes shopping in these spaces for everybody else. So it's this idea of universal access, that I know nothing about your personal finances. You can shop here or not, and I'm not going to question it like I'm not going to question anybody else's. So people are welcome in that way. Some people who shop there are also donors to Roots, and so they're contributing in different ways. But people will say, if I shop there, does it help financially, Roots? No, it doesn't help us financially, but does it serve the goal of the program? Yes. So, people can decide.
So 2 things you mentioned there. 1, the program is subsidized, and 2, you mentioned donors.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how Roots is funded.
Yeah,
People,
so many ways.
I think so many questions about that in the community.
Yeah, so lots of different ways that we access funding. I think it's important to know we have no core funding. So we are always looking for different streams of funding to come and do our programs. So right now we're about 25 to 30% government funded. That's from all different levels of government. Those are not sustaining grants. Those are not just rollover grants. Those are grants that we apply from all different levels for different pieces of programming all the time as those programs come up. We have funding that is self-generated from offering programs and workshops with partner agencies who have their own budget to do those, from selling our own products like granola or honey or vegetables. And I say that cautiously because the cost of doing those things is also, like, it's not really in the black.
We're not getting rich quick
from granola.
Yeah.
Nobody gets rich off farming. Donations and fundraisers is a really big part of it. So we have over 300 monthly donors. We are always looking for more monthly donors because those are the folks that have our back month to month, no matter what, that we can use that funding to explore new options, to be responsive and nimble, which I think is what people like about Roots, is that we can be responsive and not just doing what the government says we should be doing for this program for this amount of time. It's like, we want to do more all the time and be reliable. Foundations and other charities and corporate donations are another piece of those pies. So my goal is to have a diverse pie of funders so that when one goes or becomes less, the other ones can make up the rest of that. And that said, like, it's a lot of work finding the money to do that. So we're always welcome to new options and ideas, and we're always trying to do new events to get more people part of the picture.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's a lot of work. How many hours do you think you spent applying for grant funding?
Yeah, it's a full-time job. Like, my job is finding money for Roots, pretty much.
Yeah.
Finding money, making partners, like giving Roots an umbrella or like a platform maybe to like do the things. Not sure always what's under it or what's going to happen from it, but my job is to like sort of keep it in the realm, make it sure it has the resources to do that.
So many things too, because Roots has grown so much since, like, has the growth doubled in the last 2 years?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's things I didn't even mention. Like, now we would do like Oasis programming, which is like working with neighborhoods of older adults to help them age at home more health in like a healthy way. We also run the cafeterias and the public board. And so like we're running 3 high school cafeterias with other partners and doing a bunch of programming in there. And like really active kitchen that does tons of different things. Like there's so much programming.
There's always people in our kitchen.
So many people in
our
our kitchen.
people and other
Yeah.
people. Our space is our space is being rented constantly.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of generation
Yeah.
as well. I just think it's really important because Roots is there's so many programs in the community, and there's always a question of how does that happen?
Yeah.
So there's a big fundraiser coming up in July. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
So July 6th is the return of Matterhorn Madness. Matterhorn Madness is it's usually a team event. There are some like very brave humans who do it solo, where teams go up and down Mount Baldy ski hill 12 times, which is the equivalent from the base camp to the summit of the actual Matterhorn in the Alps, the Swiss Alps. They pay a registration fee. There's not any fundraising on top of that. It's just like register with your team and go up. It's a blast, I have to say. It's a blast for me because I'm just at the bottom, like cheering people on and yelling at them. So I'm not going up and down, but from what I hear, it's a blast. It's really actually incredible. It's done pretty quick. And it's a real great part of funding for us. So, and we are doing it with Big Thunder Nordic Ski Club this year too. So
amazing.
Yeah.
So check socials,
Yeah.
Roots to Harvest or Roots Community Food Center.
Yep.
And Erin, thank you so much. We're just out of
Absolutely.
time. Thanks for
Awesome.
coming.
Thanks, Tracey.
All right.